Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colata with Architecture Talk Tongue, and today my guest is Julia Nicholls, and Julia is a communication specialist. We're going to talk a little bit about communications. This topic can never be covered enough. I find it so important, and even this week, working with a client, it was super, it really made me realize how important it is for us architects to communicate well our brand and to find the right words to really speak about our offering. And so today Julia is joining me to sort of give her own insight into communications. So Julia, thank you so much for joining me on this talk.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
It's a pleasure to have you. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and your business.
Sure. So I launched a communications company a year ago. And really, I think I'd been in practice for over 20 years. I was director of PR at UK Practice Squire and Partners, and I'd been supporting them growing from 30 people to 225. And at the same time, my husband had started a practice. He's also an architect. We tend to stick together, as you know. So that was growing something from scratch, and starting a brand fresh and becoming known for something. And I think I could see working with architects that practices are often afraid of communications. They see it as like a dark art or something mysterious. And I wanted to create a space where I could help them to create a strategy which is more directly aimed at their business goals rather than communications for the sake of it.
Yeah, that's so good, because I think that even communications, like they're so connected to everything: your brand strategy, your business plan, your marketing, your campaigning, and it all really comes down to the way that you speak about your brand and how you express yourself to your ideal clients. And so it's an extremely crucial part. But it ties into a deeper, more important strategy for the business plan as well. So it's great that you find that link. And tell us a little bit more. Why is it important to have that strategy?
So I think, you can be a great architect. You can have all the skills that you need to be an architect. But if nobody knows who you are or what you do and what makes you the best fit for them as a client, then you're really sitting in isolation, and, the work isn't going to sort of come to you by itself. And I think, practice architects often see communications, and I think particularly the word marketing, as something a bit uncomfortable for them. They don't really want to get their hands dirty and do that. And maybe as well, they're not quite sure what it is or how to do it, or they don't see it as a skill they have. And I also think it's something that people can see as a nice to have or an add-on. And I really think that's a mistake, because it's the heart of your business. It's literally your future pipeline of work. So I don't see it as a nice to have. I think it's an absolutely must have. And I think another thing that a lot of architects do will rely on their kind of past clients. So, repeat clients or recommendations from people they already know. And there's a risk with sticking with that network that you're not really in control of that at all. So, if somebody for one reason or another has a bad experience on your job and wouldn't use you again, or if they change jobs or industries, then that line is dead for you. There's nothing you can do to change that. So I think you really need to, own and be in control of your channels to new business, and also be expanding and growing your audiences and networks all the time so that you're not left exposed. I think if without a strategy, you don't know what you're aiming for. And so you're not only wasting an opportunity to connect with your potential clients, but you're also just wasting time speaking to nobody specific. And another trap, I think, is that a lot of architects are speaking to other architects, and those are not the people that are going to commission them for new work unless it's a collaborative project. So I think it's really important that you're thinking of your clients when you're thinking of your communications. And ultimately, I think if you have the strategy in place and you've gone through that process, it will save you time, energy, and money, because you know who you're talking to and you know why, and you know what they want to hear from you. So that's why I think a strategy is really important.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And what would that strategy look like, more or less, so that we understand a little bit what to focus on? What is a strategy for communications?
Well, for me, the strength of having a strategy is that you're creating recognition for your specific skills as a practice. It's not going to be the same as somebody else's skills. You're managing and protecting your reputation in the industry, and controlling that narrative. How people experience and interact with your brand is really important and should be kind of consistent in the experience. It's how you evidence your kind of the value that you bring to the industry, your skills and your knowledge, making sure that you're popping up in front of your clients consistently, and so you're always at the front of their mind when they're thinking about projects. Where to start? You always start with your business vision and goals. So, unless your comms is aligned to your business vision and goals, then, you're wasting time. So your business vision and goals could be in terms of what sectors you either want to kind of grow your presence in, or even, create a presence in a new sector. It could be to do with scale of project. You want to increase the scale or even decrease the volume of inquiries. I know this is a thing that a lot of architects, particularly in the UK, I'm not sure if it's the same around the world, but you're having to get a lot more inquiries through the process to actually get paid jobs at the end of them. So maybe you just want to increase the amount of inquiries you get to make sure your pipeline is strong. Maybe you want to grow the practice over time. So those are kind of your business goals. It's also really important to think about your core values as a practice. So these are the sort of underlining principles that will, be across sectors. So whether you work collaboratively, how much you respond to context, or are you more sort of one who leads with a sort of a type of design, and also anything that's really important to you as a practice, maybe a cause you champion. Is sustainability really crucial to your architecture? Do you promote modern methods of construction? Do you promote community engagement as part of your design process? Those kind of things that will always be fundamental to your work. And then I think also looking at perhaps figureheads and spokespeople for the studio, who's going to kind of talk about these things and be a kind of public figure. Not everyone wants to be in that figure. Not everyone's good at it. So I think it's really important to choose those people wisely. And then really thinking about where is your area of specialism, looking at your clients, who is already working with those clients, what are they bringing to the table, and what do you have that those peers and competitors don't have, because that's the thing that's going to make you stand out of your kind of group.
Wow, this is great. And I think that those are very valid points. And I think that a lot of times people that run their own practices, they're so caught up with the everyday that sort of tend to put that on the back burner oftentimes. So from experience, of course, as a consultant that works within this sector with very busy architects that usually are more committed to their design than building the right business backbone, how would you advise for people to move forward if they wanted to work on these topics?
Okay, well, firstly, I think it's really important that you understand your clients. You're not going to be able to do anything unless you understand who they are and what they're looking for. So, and also it's not just a question of attracting a client to you, it's attracting the right client to you. And what I mean by that is a client who sees the value that you're bringing and is aligned with your values, so that you're not going to kind of be butting up against each other, because you want to go around things a different way. And I think identifying that ideal client, is it a developer? Is it an entrepreneur? Is it a homeowner? And create a kind of persona for them, which means that you can direct your communications to something specific and somebody specific. And you can get quite granular about this in terms of, their kind of lifestyle and their gender and their age. Where are we going to find these people, and what do they want to hear from us? What you want in your communications is to be a kind of valuable expert to them, and to do that you need to know what challenges they're facing as clients. So I think spending time researching the issues in that sector. So if you're an architect working with homeowners, there's going to be, of course, issues of, they're probably inexperienced in working with an architect, and they're probably worried that the budget's going to go out of control, and they've seen grand designs and they're like, oh my goodness, it's all going to go horribly wrong, I'm going to be homeless for 6 months. And I think if you're looking at a workspace operator, they've got a very different challenge. They're looking at how workspaces have changed over the last few years. You know, what do occupiers actually want now? They don't need to sit at a desk and work at a computer anymore. You know, they need space for wellness and collaboration and social side. So these are the things they're having to really quickly think on their feet about. If you know these challenges and can think of ways that your skills and experience can help, then you become really valuable to your client. And they also really feel that you speak their language and you understand them. So I think that's the first step, is really understanding how you can be useful. And remembering too that your client is not an architect. So you should be speaking to them in language that's familiar to them, not in kind of archy speak. And also in places where your clients are already looking, don't expect them to come and read architectural journals, although they might if they have an interest in design, but really try and be in their space, or, you know, approach them directly so that, you know, it's a sort of two-way conversation. And I think as well as clients, there's other people who influence clients and are useful to them themselves. So again, if you're looking at sort of private homes, it's probably more personal networks and social networks where people might get a recommendation or see, you know, a past project. If you're working for a developer, it might be more a sort of commercial agent or a planning consultant that's advising them on who would be a good fit. People that you collaborate with, other design team members who have, you know, direct relationships with clients too, could be, oh, you know, recommending you to someone because you've got this particular skill. And I think communications is also important for your own staff, both your current staff now who've kind of come on board with you for the journey and want to consistently feel that they're part of something positive with purpose, but also future employees. You know, if people have a really good sense of who you are as a practice and what you stand for, they'll be more willing to kind of, you know, send in their CV when you've got a job going.
Yeah, of course. And where would people find these clients? Do you have any suggestions as to, you know, now in digital era, obviously everything is online and there's so many different groups and audiences that we can tap into. What would be important to think about here?
I think it very much depends on what kind of client you're looking for, because obviously finding a homeowner client is going to be very, very different to finding, you know, somebody building workspaces. So I think that's going to be part of the process. And, you know, a small time developer might not be in the same spaces as a much larger developer. So I think you've got to almost stalk them a little bit for a while to understand that there's no one catch-all place where all your clients are going to be. And this is why I think strategy is so important, because there really isn't one strategy for all practice. There's a process that all practices can go through, but there isn't one strategy, because your experience is different, your specialism is different, and your clients are different. So yeah, it would really need a bit of research on who exactly your client was to know where to find them.
Mm-hmm. And what's the best way to take action in that respect?
So I think once you know who you're talking to, what their problems are, and how you can help them, you need to think about your messaging. So, you know, the language that you use and the way you communicate, and making sure, again, that the client is at the center of your communication. So every bit of content you create, you're thinking about, can my client see themselves or see this as useful information to them? Being really careful not to be general. And I think, I mean, you know, anyone working in comms such as yourself will know that you get these general statements across the industry. So, you know, I understand where they come from, because architects are sort of like, we don't want to alienate any clients. You know, we don't want people to feel that we're not the right architects for them. So they say, you know, we're a design-led, multidisciplinary practice working across all scales and sectors. And you just think, well, who's going to read that and think, this is me? You know, they're talking about nobody. So I think you have to be brave enough to be quite specific about who you're aiming for. So for example, you could say, you know, we work with inspired homeowners, or we work with ambitious entrepreneurs, or we work with progressive developers. Those are more sort of the kind of terms that people could see, okay, that, you know, maybe these are the right people for me. And it's, of course, as well common that you don't just work in one sector. So certainly clients of mine have been like, look, these are actually our two audiences. How do we speak to them both? And there are ways, there are ways around that. You can have sort of different parts of your website that more specifically speak to those people. But there needs to be that common kind of, opening page where that will encourage them to go that step further. I think showing in your communication channels how you've solved other people's problems is really key. So it's not just beautiful pictures of, finished projects or even process. It's showing how those projects and process have met the brief and solved a problem for a previous client. And I think a really important part of that is getting feedback. Making it part of your process to speak to your clients and, get feedback from them, both positive and negative, because actually, even what you could do better or, what you could work on is useful information for you. And I think that, using the whole communications toolkit, which we go through as part of the process, to just continually pop up in your client space, not in an obtrusive way, in a kind of helpful way. And I think that sort of quality and consistency is really, really important. It matters less how often you get in touch, as long as when you do get in touch, it's, really good information. So when I talk about the communications toolkit, what I mean is your website, your social media, any kind of direct communications with your client, like a newsletter, or even just sort of, sending your client articles you think they'd be interested in, meeting up for lunches, that kind of thing. More sort of networking and events in the industry. So again, popping up not just at architecture events, but at property events or homeowner events. Obviously, photography and film is a huge use to architects in, conveying your process and your product. Press coverage, obviously, and then awards to show that, you've got that kind of external recommendation and, buy-in for your projects. And I think being really realistic about what you as a company can do communications wise, you could obviously bring people in to do that, or you could say, I'll do it myself. But if you want to do it yourself, really be realistic so that you don't end up feeling kind of overwhelmed and sort of do nothing or put out bad content. Either of those would be really unwise.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so interesting. And I wonder, again, coming back to this kind of experience that I see with architects, that oftentimes they're very busy and perhaps not every business owner wants to themselves focus on it. Would you give us a little bit of an insight into how you work as a consultant? Let's just say, I'm an architecture studio and I'm looking to work with you. What would be the sort of stages we would go through in our collaboration?
So generally, I try to make it as easy on the architects as possible, because I know that they don't have much time. So what I tend to do is I have a briefing with the architect sort of by phone, and we agree the process. And it's generally quite a standard process, because there's really important things I need to find out. But we start with a sort of half-day workshop where I'm asking a lot of questions about all the bits that we've been talking about. What are the business goals? What are your core values? And we'll work through all of that information, and then I will ask them about their peers and about people that they admire in the industry, their clients, and then I go away and have a really good look at all of their information, what they've been doing so far, what their goals are for the future, how they're using different channels. I'll look at their clients. And basically, usually the process takes sort of 6 to 8 weeks. Another really important part, which it's not relevant maybe to much younger practices, but interviewing a few clients for that studio is really, really useful. We agree the questions in advance. So there's sort of, a set that are always useful to ask. But if a practice wants to know something specific, we can add in some questions. And I've never yet done, we call it a kind of perception audit. I've never done one of those where there hasn't been something really valuable that comes out of it. Because I think, as you say, when you're in practice and you're just doing the day-to-day, it's very difficult to see sometimes even what your specialisms are, because for you, they're just part of your work. But, it may be something that other practices aren't doing or aren't doing in the same way. And then after that process, so I've interviewed the clients and I've looked at, you know, all of their goals and their specialisms and their values. I'll then come back with a sort of, again, probably a 2/3 of a day workshop where I go through all of my kind of research and my recommendations and my advice. Sometimes I will generally give more advice than they'll be able to implement. So it's kind of a process that will last 5 years. And then maybe you'd want to sort of revisit it and have another go. But it's essentially, you know, here are all the different aspects of things you could do, and here's how I would suggest you tackle those parts of your business. And I can also, obviously, I don't do a sort of in-house function for practices, but I can recommend people who do, or I can create pieces of content for them. And I can also work with practices who want to establish in-house teams. So quite often practices want to get someone fairly junior in to come and be a sort of studio manager with a bit of comms on the side. So it's often really useful to have somebody work with that person as almost like a kind of exec consultant, showing them this is what you need to be aiming for, these are the channels you'll use to do it, and this is what I want you to be thinking about when you're shaping communications.
Yeah, so interesting. And in respect of sort of the outcomes of it, would a client get better communication strategy that is visible on their website? Does it have to do with email marketing? What sort of exact elements get affected by this work?
So again, it really depends on the client and what they're doing already. But certainly some of the clients I can think about, you know, sometimes it's their website, sometimes it's about having the confidence to stand out in a crowd, you know, almost be their authentic selves when they almost feel like, oh, I should probably fit into this mold. It's like, actually, no, you need to stand out a bit more. And this is actually one of your core values, but you're not showing it enough. Sometimes they won't be using certain channels at all. So we'll kind of set that up. And again, I'm not someone who's going to endorse that you use every channel available to you if that's not right for your either time or your practice. But, you know, if I think it's relevant that a company does a sort of regular client mail out and they're not already, then I'll help them kind of shape what that needs to be. Or sometimes they've already got one, but it's not quite hitting the mark. So we'll look at the content of that and say, okay, look, this is, you know, maybe a slightly better way to sort of engage your clients with that mail out. And I think it really just gives people a much better focus of what they're aiming for. And also they feel like, you know, we usually end with a kind of year calendar as well. So it kind of becomes a bit more manageable when you can see, okay, I only need to do that once every 3 months. This is how I can kind of build up content during the year. So yeah, there's generally a sort of a bit more of a framework for comms. So it feels a little bit less scary. And I'll also recommend what I think are the most important things to tackle first. So there's kind of like a timeline as well for what, you know, what I'd suggest they implement.
Interesting. Fascinating. So if anyone who's listening in would like to work with you, where do they find you? What's the best way of contact?
So I have a website, julianicholls.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So yeah, you can find me in those two places as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for joining me. So much insight and advice for architects. It was really great to hear your perspective on comms. And I'm looking forward to see more from you online and on various social media. So thank you so much for joining. And thank you for everyone who listened in.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye. Take care.